I kept asking myself, do I belong? Do I belong? How did I get here? It was this sheer luck.
That really acute feeling like I do not belong here.
At first, it was very, very tough, I'll tell you. What am I doing? Do I belong here? Maybe I don't.
Self-doubt and fear of failure.
Feeling that I wasn't similar to my teammates, from looks to cultural to interests and personality traits.
It makes me sweat just thinking about it right now because that's how I felt when I was going through this.
I think everybody gets this.
The feeling of not belonging.
You're not the first person to experience a feeling, and you're not going to be the last, and it won't be the first time it happens to you, and it won't be the last.
To me, imposter syndrome is this, kind of pervasive sense of self-doubt, feeling like you're a fraud, like you are getting away with something that you didn't earn, that you got lucky in however you ended up in your current circumstances.
My first real job, I just felt like I had faked it all the way through, and I was unprepared and unqualified, for a bit, and it was a pretty powerful feeling, early in your career.
For me, when I think about imposter syndrome and when I might be going through it, I'm in a position where I'm questioning whether or not I should be there, whether or not I belong. And I think it's that questioning of belongingness that is at the core of experiencing imposter syndrome.
When I was in my undergraduate degree in Florida, I first attempted to do computer science. I was the only girl in my class and the only Latin person in my class. And the professors really paid me no mind. I tried to get additional support, and it just really wasn't there for me. So unfortunately, I failed out of my classes because I just did not see myself there. Luckily for me, even though I failed at that, I failed into something else that was actually much better for me, and I wound up really loving and succeeding at it.
I was very early in my career, so a newer doc out in practice, and I had a patient come in for an OB confirmation, so a brand new pregnancy coming to see me for the first time. And they asked me, how old are you? How many deliveries have you done? And wow, I'm having to justify my credentials. I'm having to, justify the fact that I look young and I still actually know what I'm doing.
To me, imposter syndrome is really about self-doubt. Where it's coming from could be external or internal, but how you combat it is completely up to you.
And I think a lot of what I experienced was just my own doing. It was for me feeling that I wasn't similar to my teammates. I felt that I was putting myself down. I wasn't as outgoing as I normally was. I was just trying to keep my head down and work and hopefully not get uncovered as somebody that I wasn't.
But for me, there's that real emotional, subjective piece in the imposter element. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to find any professional who's been at it for a while who didn't feel that at some stage, that emotional part of it.
When you're feeling, components of imposter syndrome happen, recognize that. Try to understand why it's happening. Try to understand what you're feeling in the moment. That way, so in the future, you could really easily navigate around that.
First, identify it. Know it's there. Know it's always going to be there at times. The way I embrace it, my inner imposter, is identifying it and knowing how to push it and silence it out. Realizing it's there and it's not going to leave unless I can control it.
It's very hard for us high-performing, high flyers who have been that for a long time, right? To understand that you're not going to be good at everything. And that's okay.
I think the biggest part of imposter syndrome is feeling that you have to know everything, otherwise you're a fraud. And the reality is, no one knows everything.
I think perfection is not realistic at all.
Recognizing that is such a big part of it. I want to get better at the things I'm not as good at. I also want to improve, what I feel like I have more aptitudes for. But the most important thing was just honestly recognizing where I had strengths and weaknesses, and then moving on from there, and not assuming I'm going to just be good at everything.
First, acknowledge you are meant to be in any room you walk in. Point blank, period. When you get hired for a role, you're supposed to be there.
We are all here by unique circumstances, right? So no one person's background, mimics someone else. And so what someone else may have needed to overcome as a child, or what they've needed to overcome from an educational standpoint, or from a discrimination standpoint, right? You might have had the cards stacked against you in ways that are totally different than what your peer or your colleague had.
I think everyone is very unique and has certain attributes and certain contributions that there's no one can mirror the same thing exactly as that person.
You could say, okay, I might not be good at this now. What do I need to do to be good at it in the future? And if you have that type of growth mindset where you understand, okay, right now, I'm not too great at what I'm doing or where I want to go or what I want to do, how can I improve?
It's really true. If we're not growing, we're dying. And so you've got to keep challenging yourself, and it's a real gift to have people who are really good at something that you can aspire to or surpass. And so turning it around into a positive and not beating yourself up on it is the way that I approach it.
Be curious, ask questions. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there because it's just going to be detrimental to at least to myself, if I was just quiet and I didn't learn anything because I was too caught up in me not feeling like I belonged with these people.
Yeah, I really encourage people to backtrack and think about all the things that really helped to get them to where they are. So reminding yourself of all of that work that you did, right, throughout college, throughout med school, throughout residency, all those sleepless nights, all those times where you really pushed yourself, sometimes almost to the breaking point in terms of what you can take personally, professionally. And you did that work, right? You did it. You checked those boxes, and you know all the things you need to know. You sometimes just have to be reminded of that and really own it.
To overcome it, you really need to dive in and separate that negative voice and say, hey, the inner leader in me is going to tell this negative talk, push them out of the room and say, I deserve to be here.
So what I like to do when I'm feeling like, oh, do I belong here? I ground myself in helping someone else. And I think that's what helps me, because then when I go back, I say, wow, I was able to help that young person. And it shows that you truly belong where you are.
I most recently came into Google, which is a huge organization. A lot of people aspire to work there, right? The feeling of imposter syndrome sank in, I want to say, in my second or third month when I still wasn't really quite catching on. Again, I felt like a little fish in a very, very big pond. And so I had to tap back into, Camille, you are intelligent, you are resourceful, and you know how to work with people. These are the 3 skills that you have at your disposal. How can you use them right now? That was really key in just making me feel like me again, and not so much little fish, big pond.
Celebrating small wins helps you realize your self-worth. Looking back and saying, hey, you know what, that was actually cool, I did that. Having that ability to celebrate step by step, live in the moment, not look towards the future goals, but focus on where you've came.
I would say what helps me prevent myself from getting into a negative mind space is to give yourself grace. And the way I frame giving myself grace is, one, I give gratitude for the experiences that I have that brought me up to the point that I am.
About 3 months ago, I was looking to get a new job. At first, it was very, very tough, I'll tell you. And then that imposter syndrome came in, like, do I belong in education? Should I be doing something else? Why am I not getting called back for interviews? And then the interviews happened. And then still, after the first couple interviews, I blew them. I was horrible at the interview. And I said, oh man, dude, that imposter syndrome again. What am I doing? Do I belong here? Maybe I don't. And then I sat down with people who I trust. What could I do next? I need to improve my interviews. I know I have the skills and credentials that these positions are looking for. How could I finally get over to that finish line? And so with coaching from her and other folks and a lot of practice, I sharpened up my interview skills. After that, I'm happy to say I was offered 4 jobs in the past few months. And I took the job that was the right fit for me.
So I myself have a mentor. Her name is Vanessa, and I leaned on her heavily during that time because she had experience operating in spaces that didn't include people like her.
Find those people within your community that you can lean on that might either share similar experiences or, are your biggest advocates, your biggest cheerleaders that when you reach out to them, they'll remind you of just how amazing you are and how capable you are as well.
Don't be afraid to reach out to resources who are experienced. It doesn't mean you got any kind of problems or issues. It means you're working on yourself. You want to develop yourself and your skills.
I ended up having a guy who down the hall who was a fifth-year lawyer, I think he was, so he'd been through it. And I mentioned it to him, and which was sort of a vulnerable thing for me to mention it to him. That boy, I just felt like so out of my league. And he just laughed, and he came back and he said, I've been doing this 5 years. He goes, I still have this.
No, I don't think it ever goes away.
So I don't think imposter syndrome ever goes away, right? You could be the president of the United States and wonder, wow, do I really belong here, right?
I think one of the really curious things, one of the really interesting things about imposter syndrome is really that it can be a negative and a positive. And I really would encourage anyone who's feeling the negative to really try to reframe it and say, how can I use this as a positive? How can I use this to drive me to be a better version of myself?
I like to call imposter syndrome like listening to your inner critic, right? So you have two parts, right? You have an inner critic and an inner mentor. So over time, you want to feed your inner mentor that's constantly looking for growth opportunities, that's gonna tell you these affirmations about hey, you are smart, you are this, you are that. And then that inner critic that's saying, that's honestly scared for you. That's why it's feeding you these fears. It's because it's trying to protect you, right? That voice gets a little smaller because the inner mentor's voice is becoming much louder.
I think accepting the fact that imposter syndrome is a very real thing that people go through, and it is okay to go through it. I think taking ownership is a big part of it. And then I think in taking ownership of it will help people to make it an opportunity of growth rather than a debilitating opportunity for them.
Inner leader Danny tells me a lot that life is a journey. Life is a long, long journey, and no one knows the answers. So you're not alone. There's people around you who you can talk to. It's about patience and the willingness to put yourself out there.
So just remember that. And remember that the people who chose for you to be there, your supervisors, your hiring managers, your superiors, they want you there. They like you. Something about you resonates with them, and you are bringing a very particular need to the table that they need for that organization or company.
I'm in my career maybe 7 or 8 years now, and I still feel it from time to time. But the goal isn't to completely get rid of it, it's just to quiet the voice and make your confidence in yourself louder. That's all.